Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of DEC Does What. I'm your host, Sean Mahar, along with
Erica Ringewald.
And this week, we're focusing on an office that we've created here at DEC to really deepen our engagement with the Indian nations in New York State. We have several of them here in the state, and our predecessor, Basil Sagos, former commissioner, really wanted to make sure we were putting a strong emphasis on engagement with our nations here in New York. So today, we are excited to be joined by Peter Reuben, our director of the Office of Indian Nation Affairs, and Beynan Ransom, a coordinator in the Office of Indian Nation Affairs. Beynan and Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. Yeah, it's exciting to be here today.
So, Peter, Beynan, why don't you just talk high level about this Office of Indian Nation Affairs? Why did DEC create it, and why is it so important to the work that we're doing around the state?
Okay, I'll lead us off. So, in the past, DEC would always have consultation with Indigenous Nations in New York State, but it would occur when the agency thought it was appropriate to do so. What changed with the commissioner's policy on consultation is that now the nations can engage with us as well, and we reciprocate back and maintain that two-way dialogue with each of the nation's leadership and their interested community members that have approached us.
So talk to us a little bit about what is consultation, right? And what is that form, and how does it work and play out in real time?
That's a good question. Most people's everyday example is kind of a consultation with your doctor, getting a medical opinion. And so in an analogous way, we talk with the nations on environmental matters where they have an interest or a strong concern about, say, a particular resource or an initiative like climate resiliency, extreme heat planning, and so forth. And we really try to get their perspective dialed into the decision-making process to the extent that we can and within our permitted timeframes.
Well, I was going to say that, when it comes to consultation, I think it's kind of an evolving thing, but I think the fundamentals of it is still that communication and understanding. I think that's probably the most important part of this office is trying to make sure that we have this sort of higher level communication at the government kind of level. And I think in the past, we've had some struggles in terms of trying to reach the nations, and I think over the past year and a half or so, I think we've made a lot of advancement in that area.
And to do it right, consultation takes time, right? Yeah. You really need to do that, and sometimes that butts up against our regulatory process. So how does that play out, and how do we adapt, in the field as we're trying to meaningfully engage our nations on an important thing that has time constraints associated with it?
Well, I think that's where the communication comes in, and trying to understand that the nations have a different calendar than we have, for the state anyway, and that we have to make certain adjustments in terms of rollouts and timing, and just trying to make sure that the lag time that we often have internally here, we're going to see that lag time with the nations too, and that we have to try to factor that in terms of our strategic communications.
That, in addition to our office serving a role agency-wide for all the divisions and programs at DEC, we're able to communicate those, how to expect those lags in communication time and processing and getting expertise on board. So, we might have a particular situation in Region 1 in Long Island, and we can take our lessons learned from that and apply it when we work with the Buffalo office in Region 9. That way the nations have kind of a uniform and consistent approach every time they interact with us and dialogue with us.
And that's what makes consultation kind of unique in that each of the nations has their own unique way of communicating with the state. You'll see some nations will want, a strict leader-to-leader kind of communication, where other nations will say, call our program staff and just get this done.
So what are some of the examples of some of the collaborative programs that we're doing with the nations in New York, and how is that work evolving under your leadership?
So at present, we are working with particular nations on the wildlife management areas and how to assemble habitat management plans, because of course the nations have particular plant species that are of concern, animal species that are of concern, and they might have a different perspective on how we maintain spaces and landscapes for those individual species. So the first part is kind of kicking off the conversation, describing our management process, and then figuring out the best way for them to have feedback and input into our planning going forward. That's in the very early stages, but it's something we're working on with several nations. In addition to that, we're also developing a provisioning policy to address hunting, fishing, and gathering statewide that both allows DEC to fulfill its commitment to steward resources in New York State and also respects the sovereignty of Indigenous nations and their individual citizens and members.
I will say that's been some of the most meaningful work that I've been able to work on here at DEC in my tenure, working directly with you two and being able to go to the longhouses and have these formal consultations around this new policy and really, it feels historic being there on some level because you hear from a lot of the members that, this is the first time you've seen state individuals come in this setting and actually have a conversation. It's been so seemingly adversarial over the state's history, and we are trying to turn that new leaf. And it's really energizing to be there and to actually feel that we are trying to make progress and make change. And I know we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but these conversations have been really important. And I really appreciate, the work that you two are doing to really help facilitate this and create these relationships and opportunities to actually have these conversations. And I know we've got a lot more in front of us too on this policy coming up. But what are some of the next steps and some of the key points that we're working on in that regard?
Well, I think I'll kind of lead off with over in Region 9, and that I think that they're starting to develop this a good working relationship with the Seneca Nation, bringing in this idea of looking at like the Allegheny River and looking at it in terms of shared water and resources, and and their interest in the permits that are being issued, and because it could affect water quality and species of interest for them, and it's really kind of interesting to learn about their priorities. And as where consultation comes in, and some of the progress I think has been made is that establishing, like, say, quarterly meetings. And these quarterly meetings are, it's a scheduled event. It's program person speaking with program people to understand what are the issues and what are the priorities, and being able to sit and listen and be able to factor those into the next steps, working with the nations.
Can you give me an example of a situation where DEC really worked collaboratively with one of the nations to address an issue on nation territory? I believe there was an issue with waste tires on the Tuscarora Nation.
Yeah, waste tires have been an issue for almost every nation, but in particular, what happened in Region 9 was that they actually have a very good relationship with the conservation officers there. And what's been happening is that the nation members have been able to identify when events take place. It could be anything from waste tires, or it could be somebody coming up with a trailer, unloading household waste and just dumping it on the side of the road. And there's enough traffic that people are starting to notice, and they are bringing it to the attention of the conservation. This is where the council from Tuscarora and their environmental department had that good working relationship with Region 9, and they're able to get the conservation officers out there in a timely manner to be able to add tickets make it more expensive to dispose of it the wrong way than the right way. But this is something that's been developing over the years, and this is something that's actually been noticed at the nationwide level, because I know the EPA actually had an article talking about state and tribal relationships, and it was recently published. And the Tuscarora Nation was in relationship with Region 9, and DEC was highlighted as their first article.
Kudos. Nice work. So I'm glad you brought up EPA, and some of these conversations, obviously we can only do so much on the state level, but these are individual nations that happen to be in New York, and some want to focus on relations with the federal government. So how does your office interplay with like the Bureau of Indian Nation Affairs or some of the federal constructs for consultation and engagement with the nations?
For the most part, we're dealing with a lot with the EPA, but the EPA can only go so far. The DEC is much more has much more broad appeal in terms of working with the natural resources, the fish and wildlife angle of it, and including the waste. Where the EPA, they would like to have the interactions that we're having now with the nations, but for the most part, a lot of the nations will not accept federal funding directly. And that's where the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force comes in to assist those nations, where other nations will accept federal funds directly, and so they have their own tank programs, or they have their own brownfields programs to kind of parallel what New York State's doing.
So we recently recognized the finalization of the transfer of, I believe it was more than 1,000 acres of land to the Onondaga Nation. Can you tell me, either of you, a little bit about the history of that and how that happened?
So the Onondaga Nation has been a partner in the remediation and restoration of Onondaga Lake for decades. And what the NRD trustees, the Natural Resource Damage trustees, recognized was that the Onondaga Nation had more of a commitment to kind of the origin of the natural environment because it's part of their origin story as a nation and as a people. So in recognition of that, in addition to continuously working and having dialogue with the nation on the remediation, so that the active removal of pollution from the water and the soil, they also had a commitment to dialogue on the restoration. So what is the environment going to look like after all of that on the ground work is done? And so what I see as the strongest commitment to placing trust in the Onondaga Nation is the return of land back to that nation for their indigenous caretaking and stewardship into the future. And that does two things. That gives a sign to the nations that things can change, that things can be done differently, and the state is open to that. And it also tells the agency staff that work on these things that you can have a different vision, that you can be agile and be flexible to the situation, which I think in this case, our staff who work on natural resource damages were exactly that. And so thanks to the persistence of the Onondaga Nation, their leadership and their people, and the agility of the agency staff that worked on that, we were able to complete this transfer. And we'll see a different kind of restoration project going into the future, one that's more holistic and ecosystem centric.
Yeah, the Tully parcel, that's essentially the headwaters for Onondaga Creek, which is vital to the Onondaga Nation. So between working on water quality, looking at, we're trying to work with the Onondaga Nation they're interested in restoration for brook trout. And I always look at Onondaga Creek as it goes beyond the Tully parcel. And so that's our opportunity to work with the nation to come up with a project, to work with them in terms of the restoration of the whole creek for habitat, not just the Tully parcel itself, but to expand that up and downstream. And I think that's where I'm looking forward to, is looking for that collaboration with the nation, blending in that traditional ecological knowledge with the DEC's version of the scientific ecological knowledge, trying to blend those together and for the best possible outcome. I think that's going to be an exciting thing to watch for in the future.
Definitely, I'm looking forward to seeing it play out. And, again, kudos for all your help in helping us get to this historic, monumental accomplishment for the state and our relationship with the nations overall. But I know one of the key partners that we work with is the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, which is SUNY ESF, Environmental Science and Forestry, has created this program. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, and how does the Office of Indian Nation Affairs interact with the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment?
That's exactly right. The center provides technical assistance to the nations to be able to enhance the work that they do themselves, but also where we intersect with them as DEC. So some of the challenges that our staff face when they work with the nations is a lot of the knowledge that the nations offer us is practitioner-based, and sometimes it can be technically challenging to translate that practitioner-based perspective to kind of a land manager or resource manager perspective. So where the center comes into play is they provide that resource expertise to the nation's practitioners, whether it's conservation of black ash species or simply walking through a DEC managed forest to identify different natural resources that are in the area. And our staff work with the center to provide that information, that species-specific information. So say the Natural Heritage Trust might have species-specific data on a DEC forest, and the nation is interested in activity they can do there. The center really plays that facilitating role and getting the nation members up to speed on how DEC manages that land, and then kind of translating their practitioner-based information into how can we inform that on our management practices. The other role they play is they run the Native Earth Youth Camp, which is really keys into that seventh generation concept. So with all the indigenous communities, they try to look to the well-being of their community 7 generations into the future. And what that comes from is that in a person's lifetime, you might be you might learn from or gain experience from the 3 generations before you, your great-grandparents, your grandparents, and your parents. And then as you age, you might have the ability to influence 3 generations ahead of you. And so that kind of 7 generations thinking comes into play when we talk about the Native Earth camp, because you want to get the next generation of Indigenous youth keyed into these natural resources and different ways of models of stewardship and land caretaking. In addition to that, the center also facilitates our cross-cultural programming. So they actually train DEC staff that implement CP42 in order to effectuate consultation with each of the nations.
Right. I think some of the more tangible outcomes of working with the CMPE is actually looking back at the Tully parcel, which they're actually able to provide some technical assistance for the Onondaga Nation. And there's another project out on the edge of Region 8 and Region 9 that they've been involved with in terms of being able to walk through and help them document what the traditional practitioners have known for many years. And it's nice. I'm hoping that when their study is finally published, that there'll be a lot to share in terms of, and that's going to be interesting to see how the DEC will be able to compare that data to upstream and downstream for the Tonawanda Creek and look see what was there originally. Because I got a peek behind the curtain, and the data should be interesting.
Cool. Eager to see that. So I know this year DEC participated in the annual Indian Nation Leaders meeting, which was several days, and it had been a few years, right, since there were last an in-person meeting because of COVID and other stuff. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's a nice transition from what you could say is the virtual option to the in-person option. So it was shortly after I started here in this position that we had the first virtual would be my first virtual Indian Nations leaders meeting, and it just didn't have the same. It was nice to see everybody on the screen, but it was nice. It's a lot nicer to see everybody in person. And then last late November, we had an in-person Indian Nations leaders meeting, and I thought that was probably one of the better meetings that we've had in terms of communication. And I think it really kind of kickstarted things, and that led us to a lot of momentum coming into May, where we had, which would be for this calendar year, that's going to be our one in-person meeting. But that's a joint meeting with the EPA and the DEC, which we get to meet with leadership from the nation and actually get some listening time, get that face time, understanding priorities and being able to share information. There's a number of training opportunities at these events too. So between the meetings, there's actual like additional presentations that are basically that are oftentimes requested by the nations. And so we want to make sure we attend to their needs, and we want to make sure that it's a nice balance of having the EPA with their presentations and the DEC with presentations and having that time with the nations to share that having that discussion. And not only having the discussion during these presentations and such, but we also have those other meetings, the leadership one-on-one with DEC leadership, but it's also those in-between conversations, the hallway conversations that I think that are just we benefit tremendously from. But it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of time to planning. Beynan is definitely just waist deep in it, and trying to make sure we poke and prod the EPA to make sure we get our agendas and then confirming attendance and locations. The logistics of it is difficult. And but somehow Beynan seems to pull it all together every year for us. So.
And stays light on his feet at these things too, because one of the things I've come to appreciate about the Indian Nation leaders, obviously you have a host nation that sort of facilitates it, and typically they put on cultural events as part of the meeting. And this year, Beynan, I was impressed by your dance moves on the dance floor in the Longhouse. That was definitely an exciting experience and energizing one. But how do you learn all these dance moves?
Thanks. Yeah, that was one of my prouder moments at DEC, to be able to attend the social at the Mohawk Nation Longhouse with all my agency coworkers. Certainly. So that's part of the aspect of Indigenous cultures that really is committed to kind of this permanent land ethic where you have particular values around the environment. So one way that comes out is we did the pigeon dance at the social, and that is supposed to be reflective of the passenger pigeon behavior of the passenger pigeon, which is a commitment to an animal that is extinct now and is no longer with us, but we honor it by continuing that dance when we have our social dances. And so you really learn these from a young age as a child, and as you get older, you join singing groups, maybe at your school or with a group of friends, and really just continue that original commitment that comes from doing those songs and dances. Yep.
So, Erica, maybe we should have Beynan come to our executive team meetings in the morning, and we should start off with a cultural dance every Monday. So what's been your biggest surprise since this office has been created and since you've really started this work? What's been the one thing where you're like, wow, I didn't realize that this was going to, happen in this office?
I think the number of people at DEC who are already engaging with Indigenous nations. So the office was created in 2022. I was not new to DEC, but new to being introduced to all the different regions. And surprisingly, a lot of staff already have ongoing relationships and are cultivating these collaborations. So thankfully, in the case of Region 9, that conservation officer was already, in contact with the Tuscarora Environment Program, and that takes some of the weight off us in terms of kind of first introductions. But that really is the strength of the agency, is that people are committed to their work. They bleed green, and when they share a common interest in environmental matters, that lines up with the nations. That's where you see those collaborations really come to fruition.
Right, and it's something I'm pretty excited about too, because I think that with this office, it's our chance to take that enthusiasm that already exists and try to make sure it's channeled in the right direction, making sure we're in compliance with the commissioner policy on that.
I want to talk a little bit about how you both came to DEC. Pete, do you want to start and tell me your story?
A long time ago,
Yeah, it's easy.
Far away.
yeah, I think that's where it starts. But it all started out that I actually wanted the job that protected the work to protect the environment, and I just never knew how to get like that job, and so I had to go work for an international corporation, and as a result, I gained a lot of unique experiences that the DEC may or may not be interested in terms of how things are made and how I would call standard industry practices. But it wasn't until one of my classmates from the college that she convinced me that I could get that job, and that but the first step was to take that civil service exam, and from there she thought I'd be a good chemist for the DEC, and I'm like, all right, but I can make more money in the private sector. And she says, no, this is worth it. So, and my passion is really there for the environment, and this is the commitment I made. So, and yeah, so here it was. Take the exam, scored well enough, and it started out as an environmental monitor at a hazardous waste landfill, and from there, I worked myself through the chemist series, and I transitioned here to director for this office.
Fantastic. Check out those civil service exams, folks.
Definitely dec.ny.gov. You can find out more about those opportunities and follow in the footsteps of Peter Reuben on these potential career paths that you have. But Beynan, how did you come to DEC?
I suppose I was always on a trajectory to work in environmental conservation. So when I was in college, I had an opportunity to meet the Onondaga Nation leaders, Oren Lyons and Jeannie Shenandoah. And at that time, they were looking to hire an environmental technician to provide them with technical assistance, in-house technical assistance. So I applied to work for the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force and got the job working with the Onondaga Nation, which I'm extremely grateful for. As that was my first introduction to kind of the regulatory environment. At the time, they were deeply involved with the Onondaga Lake remediation and participating in the Natural Resource Damages Council. So that was really where I got my feet wet working on those kind of heavier topics. But really, when I was in graduate school, a number of my fellow students at the University at Buffalo were interested in public service and working for an agency, and two of them ended up working at DEC and suggested that I take the civil service exam as well, which I had no familiarity or background as a graduate student, but I eventually got informed about the process, applied to be a spill responder in Region 3 in the New Paltz office, and I did that for 4.5 years, covering Westchester County and Rockland County with some really great staff who are experts at cleaning up the environment and getting pollution out of places it shouldn't be. So yeah, that was my introduction to DEC and how I got into the agency.
So what's your biggest hope for the future for this office, and where do you want to see things go as we continue to evolve this over time?
Over time, I can see this office having less and less interactions with the regions, because I see the regions as taking over and making that step, building those relationships. And that's what we've been pushing. And we want to be more of a support role for the regions. And if everything works out well and we have all the support that we have now, I can see that happening.
Similarly, I'd like to see the collaborations continue to expand and deepen, and for exactly that relationship that occurs in Tuscarora, for that to continue for all of the nations, to be able to know somebody at DEC that they can call up at a moment's notice and be able to collaborate on any kind of matters or issues or concerns that come up for them.
So I know DEC is probably one of the only agencies within New York State that actually has an office dedicated to this, but we don't serve that function for all state agencies. And Governor Kathy Hochul has actually created a deputy secretary for First Nations to really deepen the state's overall engagement. How are you working with that individual in the governor's office, and how do you see that evolving over time as well?
Well, with our focus, it's strictly the environment. And with, I know we just attended the first New York State Indigenous Nations Summit. And in that capacity, that's where I really saw the Dr. Elizabeth Rule and how she really shined in terms of bringing other state agencies together to work with the nations, much in the same ways that we have our annual Indian Nations Leaders Meeting to focus on the environment. In that case, this summit was interesting, that there was several state agencies. The nations kind of cycled through and were able to have several different conversations and not just focus on the environment. And that's the kind of the relationship that we're having.
So when you guys aren't in the Office of Indian Nation
Or
Affairs,
cooking corn soup.
yeah, what do you guys like to do in your spare time?
Oh, I like to be outside as much as I can. And it pretty much has this revolving theme around either hunting or fishing or there's a tractor involved or a motorcycle. I mean, it's just as long as I'm outside, I think that's the point. So
You are a tinkerer, and I've come to appreciate that about you from the stories I've been able to glean from our road trips, Pete.
well, it's one of those things. If there's no hope for a replacement, then you got to fix it. So
So, Beynan, what about you?
I always have 100 projects that are never finished, so I take that and put that on my 6-year-old daughter, and create projects for her to do as well that are never finished. So yeah, whether it's her Girl Scout troop or a youth group in the area that needs somebody to do science and technology demonstrations, I usually get hands-on with different youth groups and try to just hand down what was passed on to me. This interest in the environment, aptitude for science and engineering, and just continuously staying curious and finding new things to work on. So for example, with Iroquois white corn, you have to actually do what's a process called washing, where you boil it in with hardwood ashes and then dehull or dehusk the corn kernels in a washing basket. And it's a process that takes an entire day or 3 days if you're really serious about it. And yeah, typically my family is just shaking their heads at me when I undertake these things, and it kind of consumes my time for short periods. But I always find a way to bring my daughter back into it and make it fun.
That's great. Did you both grow up in New York?
Yes, I grew up on the Akwesasne Mohawk Reservation.
yeah, I grew up in Tonawanda.
Well, Peter Beynan, thank you so much for being on the show and starting to shine a little spotlight on the Office of Indian Nation Affairs and the important work that you do. Pete, I got to say, you are one of the best car trip buddies that I've had in the travels around the state. You've got great stories. I know we teased a few out here, and there's some that we can't tell. But I got to say, Pete, you really got to take some lessons on dancing from Beynan, because I want to see you get a little lighter on your feet next time. And we really need you helping to lead our DEC line coming up here in the future.
Oh, I can't wait.
Me neither. But thank you, too, for being on the show today. This was a great conversation. We'll let you two get back to work.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Erica.
Erica, that was so great to hear from Peter and Beynan on the work of the Office of Indian Nation Affairs. Our newly created office to really focus these efforts. And those two are just so passionate and informative about the work that they do.
They are, and it's such important work. I don't like that word important, but I think it's really critical to meaningfully engage with the nations.
Definitely. And one of the ways that we engage with all New Yorkers is obviously the great work that DEC is doing. And we've had some frontline actions that we are facing across the state, one of which is apparently we're under a statewide drought watch.
We are under a statewide drought watch, and down in the Hudson Valley and New York City, there is a drought warning. Drought watch is the first of 4 stages of droughts. The next is emergency, followed by disaster. Under both a drought watch and a drought warning, we really encourage people to conserve water resources. So, don't wash your car. I know in New York City, Mayor Adams advised that they're not going to be washing down the outside of MTA cars, so those might get a little dirty. But it's really about getting ready just in case we elevate this further to an emergency and, God forbid, a disaster.
And hopefully we get some precipitation flowing in here that will
Looks
help
like
that.
it should be coming this week.
But that precipitation is not only going to help droughts, but because of the drought, we also have heightened wildfire concerns across the state. So, Erica, could you talk a little bit about what the wildfires we're seeing happening in New York are?
Yeah, we've had a couple. We've had, dozens at a time. And New York State is at elevated fire risk right now in many parts of the state just because of the lack of precipitation equals rain and the low humidity. So the big fire that we've been working on with a range of partners, DEC forest rangers are standing up incident command for the Jennings fire that is at the Sterling Forest State Park. Down in Orange County. That fire has estimated at about 5,300 acres, and it's pretty evenly split between New York State and New Jersey. So we have been coordinating with our partners in New Jersey. We've got New York Air National Guard, Chinook helicopters doing water drops, as well as the New York State Police, partnering with our Parks brothers and sisters, as well as the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. But that has really been an all-hands-on-deck effort to get that fire under control. And as of the most recent estimates, it's about 90% contained.
Yeah, we're making really great progress. I got to go down there and see the command center firsthand and see our rangers really marshaling all the resources that the state brings to bear, working with our local partners and coordinating with New Jersey as well. It is really an awe-inspiring experience. And I know Jeff Warnick, one of our press officers here, was embedded in the incident command structure. He's been really sending out some great videos, and I know we're going to put some more packages and hopefully in the future have some of our rangers on to really talk about this and how we approach wildfires and coordinating it, because it takes a lot of work, and our DEC experts are really essential to making that happen.
And specific to this fire, typically we send 1 or 2 crews out to western states to help fight wildfires there. We've actually got a crew here in New York from Montana.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So also, I know the governor's put in a statewide burn ban now. Typically, seasonally from March to May each year, we have a statewide burn ban that is in effect because when we're coming out of the winter, dry conditions can lead to wildfires. It's unique to actually have one in the fall, and the governor wanted to make sure that as the conditions are so dry, we're reminding New Yorkers to be fire aware and fire smart and not burn yard waste or leaves in their backyard, and really make sure that we're not burning unnecessarily, because that's really where wildfires can start in the state.
Yep. Human caused.
Exactly. Well, I think that's it for the show today. Thanks again for tuning in to DEC Does What. This is a great episode on our Office of Indian Nation Affairs. So keep emailing us at contact@dec.ny.gov. Let us know more of what you want to hear. Definitely visit dec.ny.gov for all the news information that we have to offer, and keep listening. And what else, Erica?
Get outside.
DEC Does What is a production of DEC's Division of Communication, Education, and Engagement. Our theme music is an original composition by Mike Menza, wildlife technician with DEC's Division of Fish and Wildlife. Like what you heard on this episode? Please leave a review and share this episode with others. Want to learn more about DEC's wide-ranging efforts to protect New Yorkers and the environment? Visit dec.ny.gov or connect with us on social media. You can find us using @NYSDEC. For more information on DEC Does What, visit dec.ny.gov/podcast.